Hi there, welcome to Lecture 3 of Unit 8. We're continuing on with World War II. Our topic today will be how America became involved in World War II, obviously with the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And also today we will look into how the war impacted America at home. The Japanese and the United States had a strained relationship for quite some time, going all the way back to the early 1900s when the United States in California, they were preventing Japanese students from attending public schools. And then after the Japanese became aggressive in the 1930s, attacking Manchuria and China, the United States issued sanctions against them, refusing to export oil and steel. And eventually, this resulted in the Japanese bombing Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. Now, there's some speculation out there that FDR, President Roosevelt, was aware that this attack was coming and looked the other way in order to give the United States a justifiable reason to enter the war. I find that kind of a ridiculous assertion. There's really no evidence to support that. But anyway, it was a surprise attack. It did catch America off guard, and it badly damaged the Pacific Fleet, which would lead to the United States having difficulty fighting the Japanese for a period of time after the United States entered the war. All 8 battleships that were at Pearl Harbor were damaged or sunk. Luckily for the United States, there were a few that were out. 188 planes were destroyed, over 2,500 Americans killed. The next day, President Roosevelt addressed Congress, asking Congress to declare war. In his famous speech, he says it was a day that will live in infamy. Congress was almost unanimous in voting for war. The only dissenting vote coming from Jeannette Rankin, the congresswoman from Montana, who was a pacifist and did not believe that war was justifiable on any reason. So on December 8th, the United States declared war on Japan, and in response to that, December 11th, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States. When the United States declared war, there were going to be some major changes at home. Much of this had been set up, established during World War I, and really didn't go much into effect other than the draft in World War I, because the United States was not involved in the war for that long. But mobilizing the military, the United States was more prepared for World War II militarily than they had been for World War I. The draft was instituted. Men 18 to 65 were forced to register. The Women's Army Corps, 258,000 women enlisted. Again, they were not going to serve in combat. They were serving as nurses, operators, transportation, drivers. This would be the largest war for the United States in terms of men served. Over 16 million men would serve, and women, including 1 million African Americans that served in segregated units. Propaganda was used again to drum up support for the war. Nurses are needed now. Women's place in the war. Women were not only needed in Europe and Asia, but also, maybe probably more importantly, at home. Economic mobilization, the War Production Board, their goal was to prevent strikes. And so they regulated raw materials. One half all factory production was war materials. And I spoke a little bit before myself. That was not the agency that was established to regulate strikes and prevent strikes. That's coming up here in a little bit. But a new icon was formed, Rosie the Riveter, and she was, trying to encourage women to go out into the workforce, pick up the slack that because of all the men that were off fighting. Over 5 million women joined the labor force and did whatever they could. And this really helped strengthen the fight for women's rights and equality for women.
Long, will the rain or shine, she's a part of the assembly line. She's making history, working for victory. Rosie, the river keeps a sharp lookout for sabotage, sitting up there on the fuselage. That
The War Labor Board was the agency that I mentioned earlier that was responsible for settling labor disputes. There were quite a few labor disputes during World War I and right after World War I. And so they wanted to improve the standard of living, and the Office of Price Administration froze the price levels and rent levels, and so you would not have significantly rising prices in the cost of living. Rationing became a major part of American life during World War II. In the certificate plan, these were for larger scale items that were not being produced as readily as they had been before. For example, cars, a lot of car producers were now making airplanes for the war. But anyway, you had to apply to get a certificate in order to buy one of these major items. The coupon plan were for like everyday expenditures for gas and cigarettes and coffee and milk and bread, eggs. You were given monthly coupons, and in order to buy these at the store, you had to present your coupon. And if your coupons were gone, then that's all you were going to get. Everybody was expected to suffer and give for the war effort. Taxes were increased to finance the war. Here's some rationing photos. Fuel, 3 gallons. You could buy 3 gallons. Here you see a picture of cars waiting in line to get their 3 gallons of gas. 3 gallons of gas would not go very far. Here, a sugar line, people waiting in line for sugar. Again, the coupons that they had to provide in order to buy that sugar. Federal spending increased significantly. You can see by this graph here, in 1940 the federal budget was under $10 million. By 1945 it was over $90 billion, and the majority of that spending went to the military, as you can see in the pie chart there. The result of all of this federal spending was the origins of our current national debt. In 1941, the national debt was $49 billion. By 1945, it was $259 billion. I think B is a significant statistic here. It says between 1939 and 1945, the government spent $321 billion, and that more than doubled what it had spent in the previous 150 years. And remember, this is coming on the heels of the Great Depression and all the New Deal programs. And so government spending had increased progressively as time had gone on during the 30s and 40s. This picture here is obviously outdated. It says here that the debt is $9 trillion, over $9 trillion. Today it's upwards of $17 trillion. During the World War II era, discrimination reared its ugly head in America again. It's not like it had ever gone away, but during this era it appeared and it was more pronounced once again. African Americans were migrating out of the South up to the North to find jobs because that's where there were jobs in the factories producing war goods. And there was competition for these jobs, and as a result, riots broke out across many major cities, in 47 cities. But the most famous was in Detroit, and the most costly in Detroit, the Detroit race riot in 1943. 25 African Americans were dead, 9 whites, over $2 million in property damage, and these riots appeared from city to city. In California, there were racial problems with Hispanics. The United States government had increased the number of work permits for people to work in the fields. They needed workers in the fields because, again, a lot of the men were off fighting. And so you had more Hispanic males coming up to work in the fields, and there were confrontations in Los Angeles where they were being discriminated against. And these led to the Zoot Suit riots in 1943, where many Mexican Americans were the object of frequent attacks. Zoot Suit riot, throw back a bottle of beer. Zoot Suit riot, I'm going home through your gold bag hair. Zoot Suit riot, throw back a bottle of beer. But the most well-known incident regarding discrimination of the World War II era was that of the Japanese Americans. Following the bombing of Pearl Harbor, President Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066, which called for all Japanese Americans to sell their belongings. They had 2 weeks to report to one of 9 internment camps that were located on the west coast of the United States. This was done for a number of reasons, according to Roosevelt. Number one, he said it was for their protection, so they would not be retaliated against by angry Americans. More importantly, it was done in terms of national security. They thought that these Japanese Americans might try to sabotage the war effort or act as spies. There was never one confirmed case of a Japanese American siding with the Japanese, providing any information or anything like that. They were not mistreated. They were not beaten. They were confined. And probably the most unfortunate thing about it was that they lost almost everything that belonged to them. Fred Korematsu took his case to the Supreme Court, saying that his rights as an American citizen were being infringed upon. The court ruled against him, saying that this was in the best interest of national security.
My father came from Japan in 1905. He was 15 when he immigrated from Japan. He worked until he was able to actually build a store.
Let me tell you a story in the form of a dream. I don't know why I have to tell it, but I know what it means. Close your eyes, just picture the scene as I paint it for you. It was World War II when this man named Kenji woke up. Ken was not a soldier. He was just a man with a family who owned a store in LA. That day, he crawled out of bed like he always did, bacon and eggs with wife and kids. He lived on the second floor of a little store he ran. He moved to LA from Japan. They called him immigrant. In Japanese, he'd say he was called Issei. That meant first generation in the United States, when everybody was afraid of the Germans, afraid of the Japs, but most of all afraid of a homeland attack. And that morning, when Ken went out on the doormat, his world went black, cause right there, front page news, 3 weeks before 1942, Pearl Harbor's been bombed and the Japs are coming. Pictures of soldiers dying and running. Ken knew what it would lead to, just like he guessed. The president said the evil Japanese in our home country would be locked away. They gave Ken a couple of days to get his whole life packed in 2 bags. Just 2 bags, couldn't even pack his clothes. Some folks didn't even have a suitcase to pack anything in, so 2 trash bags is all he gave them. And when the kids asked Mom, where are we going, nobody even knew what to say to them. Ken didn't want to lie, he said the US is looking for spies, so we have to live in a place called Manzanar, where a lot of Japanese people are. Stop it, don't look at the gunmen. You don't want to get the soldiers wondering if you're gonna run or not, cause if you run then you might get shot. Other than that, try not to think about it. Try not to worry about it being so crowded. Someday we'll get out, someday.
As soon as war broke out, so the FBI came and they just come to the house and you have to come. All the Japanese have to go. They took Mr. Lee and people couldn't understand why they had to take him, because he's an innocent laborer.
So now they're in a town with soldiers surrounding them. Every day, every night, look down at them. From watchtowers up on the wall, Ken couldn't really hate them at all. They were just doing the job and he wasn't gonna make any problems. He had a little garden, vegetables and fruits that he gave to the troops in a basket his wife made. But in the back of his mind, he wanted his family's life saved. Prisoners of war in their own damn country, what for? Time passed in the prison town. He wondered if he'd live it down if and when they were free. The only way out was joining the army. And supposedly, some men went out for the army, signed on, and ended up flying to Japan with a bomb. That 15-kiloton blast put an end to the war pretty fast. 2 cities were blown to bits. The end of the war came quick, and Ken got out big hopes of a normal life with his kids and his wife. But then they got back to their home, and what they saw made them feel so alone. These people had trashed every room, smashing the windows and bashing the doors, written on the walls and the floor, Japs not welcome anymore. And Kenji dropped both of his bags to the sides and just stood outside. He looked at his wife without words to say. She looked back at him, wiped the tears away, and said, someday we'll be okay, someday. Now the names have been changed, but the story's true. My family was locked up back in 42. My family was there when it was dark and damp, and they called it an internment camp.
When we first got back from camp, it was pretty bad.
I remember my husband said, oh, we're going to stay till last. Then my husband died before they closed the camp.